But first, 52 years ago to the day since Neil Armstrong stepped foot on the moon, billionaire Amazon boss Jeff Bezos blasted into space with some others and had a look around and landed safely overnight.
Go, Jeff, go, Mark, go, Wally, go, Oliver. You are going to space.
Here we go, guys. Okay. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. That's incredible.
What an absolutely amazing thing to do. And only a few days, of course, after Richard Branson did the same thing with his own technology. So this little jaunt ended with a landing in the desert. Not long afterwards, all went to plan, safe as houses, apparently. What does all this mean? Is it all about space tourism for super rich customers? Possibly. But what it shows is aspiration, innovation and ingenuity, the almost limitless capacity of humans to push the frontiers in geography and in technology. Wonderful stuff, and congrats to all involved. I wish we showed a little more of that confidence and optimism when it comes to the challenge, the deadly challenge of this coronavirus pandemic. Instead, in this country, we seem to be cowering, unable to take advantage of our own wonderful success so far. You know the pack drill. Half the country is in lockdown, all of South Australia, all of Victoria, 90% of the population of New South Wales. Now, most of the news is full of hysteria and alarmism, catastrophising every case, calling for more money, promoting more fear, even demanding tougher restrictions, as if shutting down your livelihood and consigning you to your own home is not as tough as it can get. Here's how some of it unfolded for the New South Wales Premier today.
Premier, are you considering locking down harder, or is this it? Is this as hard as New South Wales goes? And if that's the case, is there a plan B with some restrictions and the virus bubbling along until vaccination?
Look, it's really important for us not to talk about what might happen. We need to really assess the health advice and the data that we get for the next few days. And once that data comes through, once the number of cases and how they're transmitting comes through over the weekend and early next week, we'll have a better sense of what July 31 looks like. And as soon as the government knows, we will, of course, convey that. But I want to say New South Wales has put in some pretty tough restrictions, tougher than we've ever gone, tougher than some other states have ever gone. And that's because it's really important for us to quash this virus, whilst unfortunately our vaccination rates remain where they are.
So there we go, hey, wait and see. Infections were up in all three states today, about 100 cases in Sydney, a couple of dozen in Victoria and just one in South Australia, although their Premier is giving a media conference as we speak. We'll give you the latest on that in a moment. But all those areas, of course, remain locked down, which brings us back to my point about whether this unsustainable goal of 0 cases is worth chasing so hard now when we're in such a good place when it comes to vaccinations and when we must kiss goodbye to lockdowns and live with the vaccine within months anyway. Yes, I know the media and political narrative is that we're in a very bad place on vaccines, less than 15% of the population fully vaccinated. You hear it all the time. But as you know, the most vulnerable, the group who made up about 80% of all our deaths last year, those in aged care, have all been offered vaccines, with more than 90% taking up the jab. So the job's done there. And for the next important group, the over 70s, more than 3/4 have had their first jab. That gives them good protection. They can all get their second jabs within a month or so. So that's pretty much the over 70s as good as catered for as well. So that's kind of reassuring, isn't it? But not to the media or the panicked politicians. Anyway, the Prime Minister rolled out for a media conference today and he talked about how vaccine supplies and rollouts are ramping up.
A few weeks back, we're in the 700s, thousands and the 800,000s. Well, now, Australia, you've got us to 1 million a week. In this same week, we've seen 1 million doses of Pfizer turn up, and we've gone from 300,000 doses a week, escalating to 1 million doses coming every week with Pfizer.
Now, as you know, as we all know, Australia has done exceedingly well in this pandemic. No country can claim to have managed the pandemic better than us. And we know some of the problems with the vaccine developments, recommendations and the supply problems. So we all wish everyone who wants a jab already had one, of course. But the media narrative, the political game, is that this is a major federal government failing. So the press pack has been pressing for, of all things, an apology. This is as close as they got.
I know Australians would like the vaccination program to be further advanced than it is now, but I can tell you, based on the plan that was agreed and adopted by both my cabinet and endorsed by the National Cabinet last year, we're about 2 months behind where that otherwise will be. And it may even be less than that by the time we get to the end of this year. And so those delays are regrettable. We all know they're a result of many factors. People have perfect hindsight after these events. But let's remember, we were focusing on vaccines that we knew could be manufactured in Australia. This was very important.
Fair enough. Now, is Morrison being marked down because of these hassles? Perhaps, but most people understand where we stand as a nation. More to the point, as I mentioned the other day, I think people are marking down Morrison for not taking control, not forcing the states to act in a national way, not to acting in the national interest, not arguing against these endless lockdowns and state border closures. That's why I think Scott Morrison is being marked down. In fact, the Prime Minister just keeps rolling out more money to pay for these lockdowns. The short-sightedness of all this was highlighted brilliantly by John Spooner in The Australian this morning. His cartoon shows Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews, but to be fair, it could have been any of the premiers or the Prime Minister going for zero emissions and zero COVID and suggesting this will all lead to $0. Yeah, it's pretty black humour, isn't it? But no one seems to even consider how much this all costs, how much debt is being accumulated, and what happens if premiers keep locking down a year from now when we still have infections, no matter how many people are vaccinated. So once more, let me show you the facts that are reassuring. This graph shows you the age profile of COVID infections in Australia. The number of cases are overwhelmingly dominated by the younger adults. Many more young adults get infected than older Australians, but they rarely get seriously ill, and even more rarely do they die. As you see from this graph of the deaths, they are unheard of in children and younger adults, and the vast majority of the deaths occur in the over 80s and the over 90s. And those people, those who are likely to die, are most at risk from dying from COVID-19, have now largely been vaccinated. This is such good news, such reassuring news. But why don't governments share it? Why don't journalists ever mention it? Why do they all run a business model based on fear? Even health authorities are reluctant to share the detailed breakdowns. But from what I've been able to glean, with the Delta strain, these trends are actually being exacerbated. That is, because so many older people have now been vaccinated, there are even fewer older people getting infected, and the virus is spreading more commonly through the younger adults, who of course are largely unvaccinated, but not nearly as susceptible to symptoms and serious illness. Anyway, that's just the reality. That's what I'm interested in. It is a serious virus and we need to respond with great caution. But I won't be part of the hysteria. I won't ignore how well placed we are now compared to last winter. You can get plenty of the over-the-top fear-mongering and selective facts elsewhere. There can be no doubt right now, there is no argument that the lockdowns are doing infinitely more harm than the disease itself in this country. And no one pretends this is easy. It's a diabolical dilemma. But we've got to urge our politicians and health officials to pick their way out of this.